Hey, everybody, here with John Larson, Ravi Angadi, and Mark Steffler, all from Ambassador Software. We're going to take you down a little bit of a path here, talking about two key categories today. The first one, we're going to kind of touch on visionary leadership and disruptive trends. The first question for you guys is, what emerging technologies or market shifts do you believe will most redefine our industry in the next 5 years? And how is Ambassador preparing for it? John, maybe from a strategy standpoint, do you want to start this and kind of, you and I have known each other now for about a year. You've kind of taken this walk with us for the last year about, where we were and where we are and where we're going. But, what kind of shifts do you see in the market that you believe will redefine our industry in the next 5 years? And how do you kind of see us preparing for it?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, it's not a surprise, it's in the news, is there's a race for a lot of software companies to build a big established company with few people leveraging AI. People are trying to get to 100 million in ARR with 10 full-time employees. I think that's going to happen. Some of the more famous people in AI are talking about the first one person company that eventually gets to $1 billion in valuation. I think that's going to happen. So separate from companies building and disrupting with AI for their customers, I think the biggest trend, something I hope to do here, I know we're committed to it, is to absolutely bring in AI technologies and help drive efficiencies and have fun doing it. Like, it's not scary to me. One of my favorite quotes is, the best way to cope with change is to help create it. A lot of people get scared when they don't understand things, but I think we have that mentality of like, let's go try it out, let's break things, let's figure things out. So I think our team's going to come along for that ride, and I think we're going to see every single industry get disrupted with AI, both externally in their product offering, but also internally in driving efficiencies.
It's a good response. And Ravi, I think the same question to you, but where I would like to kind of hear a little bit of your experience, I think in 2009, maybe 2010, you kind of went through one of these transformational shifts as well with one of the companies you were working for, where you guys were disrupting another industry and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about what you did there, and then kind of some of the trends that you're seeing, or maybe some of the similarities that you're seeing with where Ambassador is, or where it's going, or even where the world is going? But maybe you can kind of give a little context with that shift you saw back in 2009 and 2010 when when you and I first started chatting. That was a big thing for you.
I think it was more around the 2013 timeframe. So the big disruptions in the market at that point were mobile, big data, and social. Maybe not as big of a disruption as AI. AI is probably more akin to the internet of the early 90s. But still, those three things for certain industries, and in the industry I was in more specifically, were big disruptors, and that's in hospitality, right? So if you think about consumers today, whether it's things like OpenTable or just the ability to be going somewhere while you're on the road, figure out at that moment, what's available for you, and for brands to be able to be where the customer is, wherever they want to be, when they want to be. I mean, those are all things that are not very easy to do. And so as a vendor, I must admit that, this particular company had a long history with their software being on the forefront of the industry. They had products that were for 25 plus years leading. All of a sudden, this disruption kind of came in, and these brands, worldwide brands, you're talking about the top 3,000 brands in the world, hospitality brands, they started asking for things that were not very prevalent. And I think there, as a company, as a vendor of solutions, you have to ideally be on the forefront of that. Here, we're probably on the tail end of that. I wouldn't say the tail end, but we were behind the curve. And what we found was companies like Ambassador today, with just 2, 3, 4 people, were able to deliver solutions faster, albeit incomplete, but get our customers to where they were looking to be faster with sort of these point solutions. And so that's kind of the big learning that I think I try to bring here with it to ambassadors. How can we go figure out what the customer wants before they actually come at you and you're behind the curve, right? And I think, as John, you mentioned, is I think the good thing about AI is that a lot of our customers see it as an enabler, but they don't exactly fully, they're not coming to us with specific things. Yes, internal efficiency, I get it. I was just talking to a company in Taiwan that's trying to do, as a 15% company, some much larger companies with thousands of employees are trying to do. And they're able to potentially come in sort of with that, match that sort of scale, but with internal efficiency. But here we got to figure out, what is that customer really, what can they benefit with AI? And how can we actually be in the forefront, actually delivering that business value beyond efficiency to our customers? So I would say that's sort of the big opportunity at hand.
That's good. That's a good answer. I think, kind of moving and shifting a little bit into you, Mark, as someone that leads operations and finance, I think what's really interesting as I hear from the sales team or the marketing team, we run into a lot of the finance and run into a lot of the operations parts of the businesses, making better decisions, more sound decisions, more financial decisions on behalf of the brands when they do make a decision like an ambassador, buying an ambassador. But I think for you, from an operations and finance standpoint, whether you look at a vendor you're trying to purchase or you're maybe trying to develop efficiencies in a business, what kind of market shifts what are you looking for? What are you seeing? And, what are some of the things that maybe, some of the brands we work with and so forth are seeing as well, but from an operating and finance mindset?
Yeah, I think the sophistication level across those functions is kind of increasing. I think, especially in SaaS, I think what we've seen is people become very intelligent in terms of like, what does the software do? What are my implementation costs and what are my costs to maintain? And I think what we've kind of seen even in our own space is, we have some competitors that we know had maybe 10x the staff, but they kind of supplement their platforms with a lot of labor, right? And so I think what's happening is a lot of companies are kind of looking at that for a few different reasons. One, it gets very costly. Two, is it is scalable? And then three, there's kind of almost an instant gratification that a lot of customers are looking for within those platforms, that they want to be able to do something right away and not have to wait, say, 24 hours for someone overseas to kind of get back to them. Right. So I think, when we look at our operational teams kind of internally, it's all about how fast can we get back to that customer? How much can we enable the customer to do on their own in the platform themselves to kind of get that instant gratification? But all of that stuff we did was in turn to be able to kind of offer very competitive pricing with very quick response times, right? And so I think we look at that as we kind of buy from vendors, but we also kind of adopted that philosophy internally in terms of our pricing strategy, but also kind of our go-to-market strategy operationally and pricing wise.
So one more, that's actually a really good point. So one more case on that here for you is, so, when you start to think about those efficiencies and so forth, how do you balance risk and innovation when you're kind of exploring those new kind of trends, or, how do you think about that? Because there is a risk, but then there's an innovation component.
Yeah.
And so how do you weigh that as an operator or as a finance person?
Yeah, I think AI is a really good example of that, because I think as much as it's exciting, we do see, especially in the mid-market enterprise, there's some question marks I think that they have, right? There's that trust factor that I think everyone's trying to get comfortable with. So one thing we always talk about internally is like that crawl, walk, run, right? Internally. And so, I think as we're kind of adopting new technologies or we're implementing new technologies like we have, is we kind of test them internally first. Are we comfortable with them before we allow the system to automatically just start reaching out to our customers, right? So we build up that trust with our kind of subject matter experts internally. And then in the walk phase, we then kind of release it to a pool of customers before kind of going kind of general release. And I think that's been really important, right, for us, because I think, I think it's just, you don't want to do something that's going to be disruptive to your customers and you know kind of receive that negative feedback, right? And I think that's one thing that, like, you know, you look at our G2 reviews and so forth, I think we've excelled in that area, right? And so you want to be able to maintain that. So I think there is a need for speed, as John, as you say, kind of like, hey, let's go do it and get it done. But I think it's just in terms of how do you go about it in the most efficient, effective manner, being that leader in the marketplace, getting it, but doing so in a very effective, positive way for our customers.
Yeah, before I go to you, John, on that, because I do want to comment a little bit on that let's go kind of mentality and move it. But Ravi, to the point of what Mark had just said, I'm actually curious too, when you look at it from a client angle and you're building a product, or let's just say you're revolutionizing or evolving a product, how do you think about that from a risk and innovation when you come at it from a client angle as a product owner, such as yourself? How do you think about that? You know, you make sure you're having the meetings and so forth, or do you start from somewhere? Is it the research? How do you kind of go through that thought process or incorporate that in the risk and innovation category?
Yeah, I think I see differently when you're looking at something that's truly disruptive versus incremental. So I think if we stick to the disruptive side of it, you have to often have enough market intelligence, enough intuition to say, okay, this is a good starting point. This is what I think the market's looking for. Because if you go to the customer with really big disruption, usually they might nod their head and they might say that's a great idea, but they're not going to be the ones that are potentially clamoring to adopt something, especially if they think it's disruptive. It's just the risk factor. Most customers are going to be cautious. So I think in that scenario, what I found, and I think what we're trying to do here at Ambassador, is identify some really good opportunities, develop the idea, but I think where you start mitigating that risk is early in the cycle of innovation. You start bringing in early adopters and you expose them. I think you're trying to do that with the voice bot. Expose that to a few early customers, and it often you're not necessarily looking for them to agree 100%. Really, what you're looking for is sort of their reaction and how they're likely to evolve. And not every customer is going to be the right customer for that adoption curve, that early part of the adoption curve. So finding the right customers to work with is a really critical part of doing disruptive innovation, and getting them involved in a continuous cycle of engagement through the building of that innovation or development of that innovation is really a critical, I think, part of the process.
Yeah, Ravi, I liked how you tapped on intuition there. Jeff, you know, being an entrepreneur, you know, we've all worked with people who have been leaders inside of a company. To a degree, we're all entrepreneurs and innovators. And you have to be comfortable not being understood. And that's really important. Like, you got to have that intuition, that gut check. There's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of patterns that I'm seeing personally, but then there's the intuition. And then that comes through talking to people like you're saying, Robbie, going out to the early adopters, talking to your customers, giving them something new to play with. And that's going to show you what you can get to market with. But going back to something that we kind of washed over, I believe where we're going and where a lot of other companies are going to go is what the consumer wants. Ravi, we've talked about this during our journey at ZipWhip. I know you spent your career really understanding the consumer. And people, older people, for example, some of my recent conversations aren't quite ready or comfortable to talk with a bot. That's okay. But I'm talking to a whole lot of other people, a lot younger than me, people my age, and they're getting a better experience talking to a voice AI. Ultimately, people's time is the most precious resource out there. And I want to be able to have a consumer communicate with a brand and get their questions answered and get their needs met. And I believe AI is going to do that way better than a human being can do. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about. The consumer is being rewarded for their time. So I don't know how much you want to get into where we're going.
I think that's, well, it's interesting. And maybe we spend another 5 more minutes on this and then kind of jump to another category. But it's interesting because, you know, a lot of people struggle when you're building a business as an entrepreneur. You know, you typically go after the B2B or the SaaS because that is a lot easier than going D2C, right? You go to a D2C business and then you try and get customers to come on and to engage and to all of this and so forth. I think maybe coming back to you, John, you guys kind of went through this at ZipWhip where there was like this, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there was like this D2C engagement, but then you guys moved into this B2B. And it's interesting because Ambassador is coming from the other angle, which is we have a phenomenal B2B product with some consumer engagement. And so it opens up this opportunity where we learn from the businesses and how they interact, and then we're able to jump into the customer side. I think there's a huge opportunity and upside here. But I'm curious, how do you go about from a strategy standpoint, or maybe how you did at ZipWhip, and where you recognized maybe we got to make a little bit of a shift here?
Well, it actually started with the consumer. We were a consumer-facing company where we believed text messaging was bigger than the mobile phone. It had to get to the cloud like email. It had to be accessible, which is normal today. And we became iMessage for Android after many years trying to figure that out. So we pivoted our company, and we couldn't raise capital on the new idea that businesses should be able to send and receive text messages with their customers. People are like, well, I can just pick up the phone and call the business. Why would I want to text them? So it comes back to the consumer. And so in those conversations, I remember asking some of these investors, well, do you use texting today? Well, yeah, I love texting. Well, who do you text with? Well, my girlfriend, my wife, my brother and sister, friends and family. I'm like, okay, so why wouldn't you want to text with a business? Am I missing something here? And so what the consumer has adopted and where they are going, businesses eventually follow. And so I think maybe that's helping answer that question. And so on the business side, we went back to the businesses and said, hey, we're going to go text enable your landline, your toll-free number, so you can promote call or text. And so they tried it out. And sure enough, consumers started texting, and they really appreciated it because they're getting their questions answered faster without a phone call. And maybe it was just rescheduling an appointment. That one use case was very big, but then it went into hundreds of use cases. So it always comes back to the consumer experience.
Any other last comments from anyone? That was a good response, John, but are there any last comments on, how, whether it's the market from disruptive trends or a risk in innovation and how, we think about it or how we look at our brands? Are there, any last comments or thoughts that anybody wanted to give on that?
I have one last comment that kind of overlays on some of the stuff I chatted about, unless somebody else wants to jump in.
No, go for it, John.
All right. The term conversational commerce. I've been evangelizing that since 2018 when I heard Satya Nadella on stage at the Ignite conference in Seattle use it. I remember being with John Lauer, who was the CEO of ZipWhip, and the two of us were like, yeah, that's going to happen, because we were grooming all of these conversations over messaging, which is why Twilio bought us, and they're the largest communication platform on the planet. But we knew that where a consumer was getting their questions met and where they were having a conversation with somebody on the other side at a business, if they wanted to buy something, let them. And so what's happened since then over the last 7 or 8 years is that more compliant ways of communicating over messaging and voice have arrived, and consumers are wanting to have real conversations instead of going to the web to go look for answers. But there's a human-to-human breakdown right now because the human doesn't always have the answers. They don't have access to all the data sets. And so where the conversation is, I believe more commerce is going to follow. And that's where there's a big opportunity, not just for our company, but for anybody who's looking to go serve the consumer. And if they're ready to go buy something, or if they're looking for something and they're doing it over messaging or voice where that conversation's happening, give them the tools to do it. Make it easy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you think about it from the standpoint of the conversational commerce, as you talk about giving the tools to make it easy, I think that, when we first started Ambassador in 2019, one of the things that we recognized is when we looked at the bottom of funnel with customer engagement, all the tools were broken into little dispersed areas. So you had referral, not talking to loyalty, not talking to reviews, not talking to surveys, not talking to incentives. And I think as I'm going further and further through this exercise with everyone, Ambassador 2.0, 3.0, Hero, all these things we're doing, I think I'm just recognizing that the customer is getting fed up more and more with how brands are just got all this dispersed technology and they expect the customer to engage with the brand in a meaningful and effective way. These brands just keep throwing more stuff at the consumer. So I do think that in order to get the customer to engage, you do have to have this consolidation that happens at the bottom of funnel, just like what happened at the top of funnel with leads and sales funnels and so forth. So to your point, John, I think that in order for conversational commerce to be successful, brands do have to start by interconnecting those ecosystems or finding a single platform that does it. And then they can start to evolve into better communication or better conversational commerce with the consumer. And then the consumer can start having positive experiences, which then lead from there.